Our next and last interview of the day is Ann Reisler, and Joanne is a specialist in children's books. And Joanne, just give us a background of you as a person. Where did you grow up? What schools you went to? Something about your family, when you became interested in books, and a chronology sort of where you started, where your shops were, and sort of bring us up to date in the next 10 minutes or so.
I was born in New Jersey, went to Douglas College, and married a Rutgers student. We moved to Virginia when he finished school and had a child who at the age of, I guess, 1.5, I was dragging around to bookstores, of all things, and happened to notice that children's books in the used bookstores were more appealing than the ones that were being produced at that time. Now, she's 41 years old, so that was a while ago. I started buying books ostensibly for her, but because I happened to like them and think they were beautiful. Then I started looking into the rare book world and realized that this was something I could be doing. My actual college career was a double major in biology and chemistry, as well as an education degree. I taught for a couple of years, but teaching was not for me. And so there I was with the children's books and being captured by them, so to speak. And before I knew it, I was buying duplicates and triplicates of books that I thought had value far greater than what they were priced at in the used bookstores. And one day my husband said to me, "You're filling up the house. Prove to me that these duplicates and triplicates have a value." Put an ad in the Washington Post, and people came and bought my books. And
what is the time frame we're talking
well,
about?
I've been doing this now for a little over 39 years.
So this is back in the late 60s, early 70s,
yeah,
would you say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Did you start by having an open shop, or did you?
I've never had a shop.
Okay.
I've always worked from home, doing catalogs and exhibiting at shows. Early in the career, my husband had his own company, and as such, travel to do shows was limited. We did some, but after he ran his company for 25 years, he decided that what he wanted to do was desktop publishing, in other words, producing catalogs. And so he closed his company down over the course of, say, 5 years, and while doing that, started working with me more exclusively, so to speak, because he always worked with me, building up the business. And he made a tremendous impact, not just in children's books, but in the rare book world, because he was a computer person who, with an interest in desktop publishing, was pushing the catalogs to the limits appearance-wise. And it changed how everyone else was doing their catalogs. Yeah. So we've been complimented all over the world by these catalogs, and it's in essence been acknowledged that he was the force behind the whole rare book world doing beautiful catalogs.
The internet is something that we all have to live with on a daily basis. Some of the people who have been interviewed today have found it to be the foe of the bookseller. Others have found it to be the friend of the bookseller. How do you stand on this issue?
Well, first of all, I have to tell you, I'm computer illiterate. My husband is highly computer skilled, so they're two extremes. I have not been pleased by what's happened with the internet and the rare book world. Many people have been stung by it because they're not knowledgeable enough to deal with it, or you can be knowledgeable and still be hurt because you're dealing with someone who's not reputable, and they'll send you something that's defective, and then they'll say, I had one person say to me, my husband's a policeman
Yeah.
out in Oregon.
Yeah, well, thanks for the info.
I mean, come on now. But I've had clients come to me who had been good clients, went to the internet, and then came back because of such stories. So really, I would say the internet, for higher level rare book world, is a foe, not a friend. For the low-priced books, it's, I guess, a friend. I don't deal in many low-priced books, so I can't really comment on that. But I do know that a lot of dealers who deal in the everyday books, so to speak, have said that the price of things that seem to be a bit obscure have dropped significantly because of the internet, so even they, I'm sure, have been affected. But in my world, I like the person-to-person contact, and I guess I'm old enough and been in the business long enough so I can choose to run it the way I please. Although we do buy some, we don't buy on the internet, but we sell on the internet occasionally. And occasionally we'll pick up a really good customer this way.
Right.
But it's certainly not a big part of our business.
About how many catalogs a year do you think you issue?
Well, we've been issuing about 4 a year. We're down to 2, and since my husband does that and is not well at this point, it's up in the air as to he's done 2 this year, and we'll see, how it goes.
How many shows do you do a year?
Well, I went from 5 or 6 to 15, and now we're really down to the New York and California book fairs.
That's about it.
And that's it. Yeah. Those are the major collectors are on the coasts, and the collectors in the Midwest try to come to at least one of those shows. So I think that's adequate, along with the catalogs, to run a fairly decent business.
Can you remember when you became a member of the ABAA?
Many years ago, because
yeah,
my first book fair in ABAA was at the Plaza Hotel.
So that's 1960 what?
It was the last Plaza Hotel show. So I don't know where to date it exactly.
I think it was somewhere in the 67 or 68.
Probably early 70s.
Maybe early 70s.
Yeah. So. Yes. And as a matter of fact, I shared a booth with someone by the name of Rocky Gardner, who was one of the greats as far as ephemera and the rarities of the paper world. Yeah.
Speaking about Rocky, as you were progressing along as a young bookseller, who were some of the people who were mentors or who were helpful to you, or you felt were positive influences on your career?
Well, initially it was Justin Schiller. We became friends, and I think he's taught me a fair bit. Sam Murray.
Of course.
And probably those two I pretty much learned on my own in a way. I have one very funny story, if you'd like to hear it.
Sure.
As I said, Rocky and Avis shared a booth with us at the Plaza Hotel. And Rocky was negotiating a book that he had with a French person, price-wise, that is. And Rocky didn't speak French or understand it, and the French person didn't speak English or understand it. And there they were negotiating the price. And before we knew it, my husband speaks French, by the way, before we knew it, they had crossed paths. So my husband intervened and sort of settled on a price for them. But it was funny.
Great stories.
Yeah.
I remember so many great booksellers from that era. Are there any particular ones that stand out other than Rocky and Sam that you can recall from the 60s and 70s?
I'm trying to think the name. Massachusetts, Bentai. Yeah,
sure.
We got to Bentai late, I would say, because a couple of people who bore the fruits of being tied into Bentai said, "Oh, you don't want to go there," and that's one of the many regrets that we talk about. because Ben Tai was a wonderful book dealer. He took a liking to our daughter, and he also taught me as far as early books were concerned. But I didn't have the benefit of knowing him long enough. But I am glad I did get to know him.
Well, Marcus McCorson is writing an article or a book about him. And,
really?
And so you're going to learn more about him.
Oh, that's wonderful.
As time goes on.
Yeah, he certainly deserves it. And as I said, we met him a little too late, but we still had time with him.
The association, the ABAA as we know it, is sort of like a two-tiered organization now. There are a bunch of us in our 60s and 70s, and then there's really a big gap.
Yes.
And
yeah.
The concern that I have, and maybe others have, is how is this gap ever going to be filled? What happens when the 200 of us are no longer here?
Yeah, I've wondered the same thing in all honesty, because the younger book dealers have a different orientation to what us old guys have. And you're not going to fill the gap. The whole momentum of the rare book collecting is in the process of changing as a result.
I think it's a serious problem, because if we as an association want to continue to fund the projects, we have to have a membership that pays dues. And if that membership should suddenly disappear, what do we have?
Well, we are getting some new members, and I think we just have to see what happens. There's nothing more we can do about it. I mean, everyone knows about us, and knows that the ABAA book fairs are certainly the ones that attract the high-end collectors, the more sophisticated collectors. When I say high-end, I guess maybe that's not quite fair, because they don't have to be people who have a tremendous amount of money, but they have to have a sophistication of taste. And those people tend to find the ABAA people. Those are the ones they focus on. Many of them being people who have dealt some with other dealers and found that the breadth of knowledge wasn't as great for their purposes.
As a old-time bookseller, you should excuse the expression. When young people or retirees come to you and say, Joanne, I think I'd like to be a bookseller, what kind of advice would you give them in this day and age?
In this day and age, what kind of advice would I give them? That's a hard question. Yeah, I mean, because people have come to me and said, how do you become a book dealer? And it's something that's your interest has to be deep, your commitment has to be great, and you have to be willing to do the research on the individual books so that you know that you're presenting what you claim to be presenting. I mean, one of the real problems in our world is that people offer things as first editions that are not first editions and such. So it's a question of doing the research. And now there are schools that help these people. When I started out, that was not the case. I learned on my own, learned by doing, so to speak. To me, the important thing is integrity of the dealer. That's crucial. And integrity means knowing your field, studying to learn it however, hopefully there are people who will take, the older ones like us will take people under wing and help them in any way we can, assuming they're willing to ask for it. And so the rare book world with integrity hopefully will continue on.
What do you see as some of the challenges we face as booksellers as we move ahead?
Well, the real challenge, as I see it, is that the taste of the collector, and now I'm not talking about institutions, because there you have the depth and breadth that you'd like to see in developing a collection. For me, it's children's books. But the taste of the collector of today is very different than it was when I started out. When I started out, The rarities were the very early children's books, and I can only speak to children's books because that's all I know. The 18th and 19th century, and even before that, so to speak, books, and developing a collection that starts at the beginnings, like for children's Orbis Pictus, from the 1600s would be the book you'd probably direct yourself towards. Today, though, the collectors are more interested in high spots of 20th century, things that they can relate to, books that they have read and enjoyed. So they're not looking for the depth and breadth of development of a collection that I think is important, or that perhaps you think is important, but they're looking more towards the things that are important that they can relate to, and only that which they can relate to. They're not looking for the history.
What are some of the hot children's books? Is the Dr. Seuss stuff hot, or is it not?
Right now, I think it's cooled down a little, in all honesty, but he was so terribly important that it's sort of like some years ago, Rackham was hot as an illustrator, and then all of a sudden the market was swamped with Rackham, and you couldn't give a Rackham away. And there was great interest in Seuss not that long ago, and all of a sudden every Seuss first edition you could think of appeared, and so the market calmed down. But the interesting thing is, the market calming down is not a market that's disappearing. It just sort of goes down a little, levels off, and then starts back up again. So as opposed to the stock market, where you can have great plummets, I've not seen that at all in the children's book world. And again, that's all that I can speak to.
Are the Harry Potter books considered children's books?
Yes, they are considered children's books, and the response is overwhelming. $25,000, $35,000 for first edition.
Right,
first
I was just absolutely blown
away
by that.
300 copies or something. I find that incredible. I, in all honesty, am not involved in that market. It just ran away from me before I even got a sense of it or an appreciation for it, although they are great books in their own right.
I don't know what you might want to comment or not comment, but I recently looked at a very nice book of miniatures and children's books that Ann Reisler put out.
Oh, that's a wonderful book.
And I thought it was really a spectacular thing.
Absolutely.
Is it useful to the collector? Is it a collector's book or a dealer's book?
Well, it's both. If the collector is a collector of miniatures, they must have that book. It's the best thing on the market. If otherwise, in other words, it's not a broadly desired book, but every dealer should have it as long as they have the scope where they're buying miniatures. Ann Reisler just got a wonderful collection of miniature books out in California last month, and I was watching her as she looked through the books, and the gleam in her eye, it's just a wonderful thing. She loves those miniatures, and that's where such a wonderful collection should have gone. And as she puts them out for people to see, enjoy, and buy, I said to her, we should have pictures of you and these miniatures, because one of her cases is full of them now, for the ABAA letter. Yeah.
Before I let you go, I just want to ask you a couple of comments. Talk a little bit about one of your great buys, and talk a little bit about one of your great disappointments.
Oh, Sam Murray taught me something very interesting. And we were first starting out, and he had a copy of Doyle's in Fairyland, which is a very beautiful book from 1870. And he had $160 on it. And he said to me, if you buy it here and now, you can have it for $140. Well, that was back in the 70s, early 70s, as a matter of fact, and that was a lot of money then for a book. And my husband, daughter, and I, looked at each other. We all loved the book, but we thought, gee, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And we didn't buy it. And we got home and we called him up and we told him to send it. And of course, he billed me at $160, just as he said he would. And the thing is, the errors of omission that we make. I've had some very wonderful buys, but I've been doing it for many, many years. So, it's hard to say. I used to go to Brimfield, which is a big flea market,
sure.
and I'd walk the field all night. And I'd buy books for $10 that were worth $1,000 to $2,000 then. I even in auction bought one day in New York at Christie's. I put a $1,000 bid in on a book and I bought it for $90. And needless to say, I sold it for a lot more than $1,000. So, wherever I turn, I've been very lucky because I've learned my trade. And I've had wonderful buys. Even today, a wonderful buy is not a $90 item, but it could be a $9,000 item or a $60-some-odd thousand item. I bought a painting in London, Beatrix Potter painting, and paid a record price for it some years ago. I left my husband to do the bidding on the phone. I had been in London the month before, seen the painting, came home and said to my husband, "How much do you love me?" I had been looking for a Beatrix Potter watercolor for years and had seen a number on the market, but nothing like this. And he looked at me and he said, well, and then I had the nerve to let him bid on the phone while I went off to play tennis. Well, it turned out I was a fifth wheel on the tennis court. Someone came who wasn't supposed to be there, so I went right home, and I walk in, and the phone is jingling off the hook. It's the London Times. And since he had paid a record price, and they had given him his name and information, so he did buy it for me. Ironically, he had checked the pound-dollar ratio just before they called him, and the dollar had gotten just a little bit stronger, so he went just that extra, whatever. Now, Justin Schiller was rather angry with us because he had flown there to buy that painting for a client. And I had told him the month before, I said, "Justin, I've seen the Potter that I want." He could have flown there to buy it for me instead, but that wasn't the case. But that's, and certainly it was not inexpensive, but is a wonderful item. To me, it's not getting the steals, so to speak, as to getting the great rarities. There was a big auction in New Hampshire at Whittington's many years ago, the Jake sale. I don't know if you heard about that or not. I went there. I drove up by myself from Virginia to New Hampshire, which for me was venturing forth a little, leaving my husband and daughter home. And I probably spent $100,000 in the 1970s that I didn't have, so to speak, and wished I had spent more. I bought, in that collection, there was a group of maybe 8 to 10 18th century harlequinades, which are turn-up books. And there were Meggendorfers. And I could go on and on with the wondrous material that I bought. And of course, if you look back at what I paid then as to what it's worth now, they were bargains.
Well, Joanne, thanks very much for sharing 30 minutes with us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
It was great. Thank you.
Okay.